Hello everybody, welcome to GTPlanet and welcome to another video here on our YouTube channel. I'm Chaz Draycott, joined by the wonderful Jordan Greer and Andrew Evans, and we're going to be talking about Gran Turismo's wonderful Sophy AI this week. And one thing that we've obviously seen recently is that it's been included in the game for all of us racers, no matter where we are in the world, to try racing against it. It's been a while since we've heard anything about it, essentially. It's actually been with us since update 1.29 all the way back in March. And the Sony AI team have quietly been evaluating everything since then and seeing what has been going on with it, how people have been reacting to it and using it. GTPlanet, luckily, have had a chance to speak exclusively with Dr. Pete Wurman, the director of Sony AI America and GT Sophie project leader, to find out more about it. Hello everybody, Chaz here. Sorry to interrupt, but I would just like to extend a massive thank you from everybody here at GTPlanet to Thrustmaster for sponsoring today's video. We're very grateful for their support and the fact that they've sent us some of their TGT2 wheels. It's built from the ground up for the hardcore dedicated expert racers on PS5 and PC, with zero dead zones or latency in force feedback performance. I've had a fantastic time racing with it, and you'll see it appearing in some more of our videos, but let's get straight back into it, shall we? Jordan, you've had the main contact with the doctor himself and had a chat with him. It's been quite an experience to sort of just see how they're finding all of the information that they're getting from this, isn't it?
Yes, and unfortunately we weren't able to get him on a video call, but we did have this email interview, and I was really grateful for him to spend some time to answer some of these questions. I think they've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, and they learned a lot from that first race together test. So appreciated this opportunity that we had, and so thank you to Dr. Wurman if you're watching, and yeah, looking forward to get into this.
Now, one thing I wanted to say as well is that I'm actually kind of gutted because I was hoping to race against Sophy in one of the videos that we've been doing on the channel recently, and just as I contacted Andrew about doing it and potentially getting together to race Sophy, it's now disappeared again. So I've not actually had a chance to take it on myself because I was saving it for the perfect moment, and now I've missed it. So I'm very jealous of everybody that has done. But yeah, we've got obviously some fantastic questions and answers and points to go through, so we'll get into it. The first question of which was, what were some of the most interesting data points that you collected with Sophy's debut in Gran Turismo 7?
Yeah, and so Dr. Wurman's answer here was, quote, "Releasing Gran Turismo Sophie in GT7 allowed us for the first time to evaluate how well the neural network performed when embedded in the game. We learned quite a bit about the specific engineering tasks involved in making the agent fully integrated, as well as the game design itself. GT Sophie is such a good driver that it was challenging to find combinations of cars that made the races fun for a variety of skill levels." And so it's kind of an interesting response here. What he means by fully integrated, I think, is the fact that Sophie was running on the console itself, and that differed compared to how we saw Sophie previously in the first race together events that they hosted at Polyphony's offices there in Tokyo, and even the first time I got to try it at the World Finals in Monaco. There was basically a setup that they had going. So they had a PC, and it was, I guess consoles. I'm not really sure. It was just a big mess of wires and cables and computers over there. And then I was playing on a PS5, of course. But it was clear there was some network involvement going on. I was basically driving against Sophie as a player, as an online player. But with the race together event that was actually hosted in Gran Turismo 7. Sophie was running, all of the Sophie agents were running locally on the PS5. And so it's interesting, that he mentioned this was a challenge. He didn't say challenge, but I think it was something that they had to actually deal with. And that's probably trickier than most people realize from a computation standpoint. I'd say that was definitely an engineering challenge. And then the game design is something else. When I actually flew out to PlayStation's North American headquarters and met with Dr. Wurman, and actually spoke to them in person and got a chance to try Sophie as it appeared in GT7 for the first time, they mentioned that Polyphony was actually the ones taking care of the game integration itself. So that was their decision on the little emojis above the cars, and how the
Yeah.
game mode itself was implemented. And so that really wasn't something that Sony AI worked on. That was something they left to Polyphony's expertise. And then yeah, it was sort of interesting to see how they play together with Polyphony and
Yeah.
Sony AI, and it's sort of a collaborative effort between these two organizations, which is one thing that I think makes it so unique. It's not something Polyphony typically does, but
Mm.
they are in this case.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you mentioned the emojis there. It's not obviously the key point to pick up on, but it was something that I always wondered, like where the actual link was with that. I mean, it's just the typical sort of polyphony fun element going into it, isn't it? I mean, when we put the article and the video together, Andrew, about the engine swaps recently, the animation of chucking the new engines in and stuff. It's great to see those elements of fun in it, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was amazing.
yeah. It added a huge depth of character, I thought. I mean, it was. I mean, I suppose some of the players reacted as if it was like a gimmick of kind, but it added just kind of that little extra. And the emojis weren't necessarily always on point with what was going on, like the cars getting Sophie getting angry at you for overtaking, or having a good old laugh at your expense if you failed. But it did add a lot of fun, and it was an interesting way to kind of humanize, I suppose, the AI agents. And it was, I mean, as Jordan said, when he first played it, it was basically as Sophie was on our console or a laptop or a PC, and a lot of people kind of swore blind that we would never be able to race Sophie on a PlayStation 5 in a game, and then we had like three of them. We were racing against three of them at once. So I imagine the getting them crammed into the PlayStation 5 was difficult, but it's something that Sony AI managed to achieve. And I mean, it was a lot of fun playing against Sophie.
Well, that's the thing. That's why I'm very jealous, because I still haven't. So I'm gonna hopefully at some point witness it. But I mean, Andrew makes a good.
She'll be back.
Oh yeah, fingers crossed, indeed. Andrew makes a good point though, Jordan. I mean, the fact that they had to implement it so that we could play it at home, and just log on, get on the game, and just play it ourselves. It's such a. I mean, I know a bit about programming and coding, but it's very, very basic stuff. But just being able to put that together is such a mammoth undertaking. Even with a basic understanding of it, it must have been terrifying for them to think we now somehow need to make this available for everyone.
I know. I don't know how they did it. It's interesting too when I speak with the Sony AI team or even Kazunori Yamauchi, and I was asking them about how the AI is actually implemented, and Yamauchi would always say, oh, well, it's basically just a set of rules, of if then rules, like if this is happening in a race, then you do this. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm a programmer and I'm I understand what he's talking about, but I'm like, that's a lot of if thens, like that's a lot of conditional statements, because it's this endless thing. And so I know the way, and when I say I know, again, I mean, this is AI it's a whole different world, but I have a general understanding of how it works, and I think enough to probably be wrong, but the way this is working, it's trained, and so then this training generates a set of rules that then Sophie follows from, and that's what's actually running on the game. And so it is basically still a set of if-then statements which are executing, but those if-then statements have been defined by this AI agent, which were generated from the training. And so that's my understanding of it. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but these if-thens are more complex. It's a much more complicated system.
Yeah.
So it's really impressive, but I can't get a truly clear answer from anyone involved on exactly how this works. I don't know if that's because it's more complex, than they can get into. Maybe there's only a few people, engineers at Polyphony, which actually understand how it really works, or maybe it's a trade secret type thing. Maybe they don't really want to reveal that. It's one of the Gran Turismo development mysteries. We'll probably never really know.
But sometimes I think it's better not to know as well, because it keeps us all a bit more intrigued about it, doesn't it? I love the idea of never finding out what exactly goes into it, and we all just have to sit and wonder and just try and beat it, because obviously it's a very talented bit of kit in itself, to be fair. I mean, I've seen some amazing videos of, even some of the World Series drivers getting absolutely mugged off with cutbacks, and Sophie setting up moves against them and just breezing past them on corner exit. It's such a wonderful thing to see, because usually when you get an AI in a game, I mean, I play a lot of a different game, let's just call it football with cars. And whenever you play against the AI on that and you get to a certain level, I'm by no means the best in the world on it, but with me and my brother get to a certain place with it, and we play 2v2 on there, and we just kick its backside all over the place, and it's not fun anymore. But when the AI is suddenly a massive challenge, you don't have to always go online to go racing against people with a similar pedigree. And I suppose, Andrew, with online racing on the table, there's always somebody to race against. But if you don't have a network connection, a lot of the time you can't usually have the access to the game. But just in case, it's obviously good to be able to race against an AI that's got that capability, isn't it?
Well, I mean, more than that, it's fairness is, I suppose, bred into Sophie. If you're playing online multiplayer, your gaming experience is always defined by how the other people around you are going to act, and they're not necessarily always going to act with the best intentions. But Sophie has been engineered to do that, and you can be more or less assured of a fair race, if sometimes a fairly brutal race, and with the emojis going at you when it doesn't go your way.
Yeah, a bit of friendly toxicity, we'll call it. I quite enjoy that. We'll move on to the next question, though. Next up, we asked, what are your thoughts on the various reactions of the public to Sophie, and what do you think the general consensus was from players? Did any comments or opinions surprise you?
Yeah, so I was curious to hear his response on this question. And so Dr. Wurman said, quote, "We saw a lot of very positive comments by players about GT Sophie. They voiced strong support for rolling out the technology throughout the campaign mode. Yes. Many said that it provided a game-changing racing experience and that racing GT Sophie resembled the best experience they had racing other humans in the online mode, but without the hassles. Many also requested the ability to turn down or modulate the skill so they could find a level that matched their playing skill," end quote. So, I think this sort of taps into something that is really important, and that's rolling out Sophie to the rest of the game, because a lot of people, I don't think, truly understand, casual players that just see Sophie and they race together event, and they say, well, why isn't this in the rest of the game? And that's a very fair question. Forza Motorsport, they just had their announcement for their next game, and they made Sophie-like claims in some of their phrasing when they revealed the game. They said, oh, it's got this agent, and they used AI, and they said it was trained and that sort of thing. So it's not clear exactly if what they've done is as sophisticated as Sophie, and I'm curious to hear if they bring that up more in the future, in future announcements. But
definitely.
The competition is definitely starting to catch up, I guess, for lack of a better word. They know that this is really sophisticated stuff, and the other game developers are not going to rest on their laurels. So it is important that it comes to the rest of the game. And what he said, I know I certainly felt that way about GT Sophie, and he might have read my article. I don't know. But when you actually play that mode, it's so addictive, because this is your chance to have really close racing. If you screw up, if you go off track, if you do that in an online race, your race is basically done, and you may get to play around with some back markers, or you're just done. And that's why a lot of people rage quit. I mean, it's understandable, because you're not having fun anymore. But with Sophie, I mean, it's right there. It's on your tail from the start of the race, and you're having these really engaged battles. And I think that's what makes it so compelling, and more compelling than online racing in a way, because if you just want to go in and get a quick hit of some racing action, wheel to wheel, good battles, that sort of thing, you would just go to Sophie. And I found myself just going back to the mode over and over and over again when it was live. So he has a good point there. I'm glad that he understands that. And skill modulation is another factor that will be important, because some people, just looking through the posts in the GTPlanet forums once Sophie came out, some people said, "Oh, it's so great. I'm having great battles." Other people said, "Oh, well, this is easy for me. Like, I wish it was more challenging. I wish it was faster." And so that is a tricky thing to get right. But on the flip side of that, I think they need to be careful too, because when you have something that can be easily changed, then that sort of takes the challenge away. Yeah. And then that brings it back into how it's going to be integrated with the rest of the game. So they need to come up with a system where, you have this progressive challenge. And so people that are maybe less skilled players are going into the game and they're like, I can't beat it. Instead of adjusting a slider, they need to go say, hey, I got to get better in order to compete with this thing. And that's not an easy problem to solve. No. Of course, people have a lot of thoughts on how Polyphony have designed the structure of the game, and rightfully so. And so there may not be a lot of confidence in whatever they eventually come up with, but we'll see. It's going to be different, and things can be very different with an agent like Sophie behind the wheel. Hopefully, that will open up some new opportunities for game design for Polyphony.
I'm intrigued to see what the element of the learning side of things is like, because obviously there's so much AI now involvement, and even just daft things like Photoshop. My brother's working a lot on that and showing me some of the stuff it can do, and it's terrifying. But with an AI like this, being able to learn what its competitor's pace is like, whether it naturally dials itself back or whether it does sort of say, no, you need to get better. It's an interesting argument, actually, because you've got the right idea there, and I completely agree that you have to see it in a positive light of, I need to catch up to that, rather than dial it down to my level, make life easier. I mean, if you were racing for real in motorsport, you can't just tell everybody else to slow down for you. You have to get quicker and get better in as many ways as you can. And you had a bit of a chuckle, Andrew, about the hassles of online racing as well. I think we both share the same thought on that, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to be at the mercy of how other people behave when you're playing in online multiplayer.
Yeah,
and even though there's skill brackets in the game, you might find yourself in an online race against people who are considerably faster or considerably slower than you. And I suppose the same thing can apply to Sophie as well. That they do really need to find a way of making Sophie not necessarily as quick in the beginner levels of the game, but not necessarily as good as it can be either, because this is supposedly with superhuman speed by the early research material. So, I mean, some way of making it slower or faster depending on the level of the game that you're in would be good, but it's an incredible challenge, because how do you unteach Sophie to be fast?
Well, that's it. There's a lot of fine tuning.
The way they approached it in Race Together was they simply gave Sophie worse cars. And obviously that's an approach. But if you're going into a 700 pp race against AI, you want them to be in 700 pp cars, and you want to be, you're going to be having the close racing. But people do have different skill levels. I'm naturally several percent below the really good people, and a few percent above the really bad people. It would be great if I could have AI that races at my speed, and it would be great if people have AI that race at the slower and the faster ends as well. And it could also, eventually train some of the world's best to be even better, which is a petrifying thought.
Well, that's actually a good point, though, because it could be used as a training tool. Because Indeed. If you can have repetitive races again and again against the same tool, rather than against different people online all the time that behave in different ways, if you're doing the latter, you're not picking up on a pattern of behavior or certain ways that it should be done. There's no right or wrong way most of the time in motorsport. It's all circumstantial. But it's very It's only literally just come into my head, like the cogs are whirring now. But the fact that it could be used to train is such a massive element that maybe some people hadn't even considered yet. I don't know. What do you reckon?
Do you want to say that one, Jordan?
Well, that's absolutely true, and that was my first impression of it from the minute I tried it, even in the private demos. It was so exciting because never before. Well, I shouldn't say that. Never before, but I mean, I've been in great battles before, but when you're racing and you have a better driver behind you and you're defending, it makes you take lines that you're not used to. It makes you do things that you don't typically do, and it's really exciting. I mean, that's fun. That's racing. That's what racing is. And so many times it's so rare to actually get in one of those situations in a race, in an online race. It certainly doesn't happen with other AIs, and in online racing it's very rare. It just, every couple of races the stars align and you have a great battle. Well, with Sophie, and especially the way that they designed these initial race together events, you've got basically Igor Fraga on your tail from the first or second corner. And so part of the battle of the race together events is keeping Sophie from passing you. And what an amazing training tool for defensive driving.
Definitely.
How else are you going to do that without getting a better driver, a better player to just race behind you and say, okay, I'm going to try to pass you? Well, that's not really realistic. You're not going to get someone, or you're going to have to pay them, or just luck out and say this guy's going to just spend his time to help make you a better defensive driver. That doesn't really happen. So what an opportunity to have this technology. I immediately recognized that it was going to make me a faster driver. And it's the same, like if it does get past you, then you're in that chase mode and you're the attacking driver from that point on. And what a great tool, like it really is going to make everybody of all skill levels better drivers, better competitors.
And it's that consistency in how it will teach, and not even it's not necessarily forcing itself to teach. It's just there to just give you a race and put you in a scenario, because that's the thing. We can all do hot laps and improve certain lines and whatever, but like you say, if you're taking lines you're not used to or braking earlier than you used to compromise for something, that's when it can all crumble and fall apart. Obviously, coming with that and the potential of how it does work, there's going to be misconceptions of how it works as well. And obviously the next question, what do you believe are the biggest misconceptions that users have about Sophie and how it works? Because I imagine there's a few.
Yeah, there were a few. I saw a lot of them. So I was curious to hear Dr. Wurman's response to this. So he said, quote, "A lot of players understood the technology quite well, but there were also quite a few misconceptions. For one, theories were shared about how easy it would be to make a slower version of GT Sophie. We've been working on that, and it turns out to be a lot harder than it may initially seem to make an agent that is slower in a real human way. It was also interesting how much the players anthropomorphized the agent, attributing intentions or desires to the agent's behavior when it was really just reacting to the situation at hand. Of course, our goal is to create an experience that mimics racing against good, clean human drivers. So, in a sense, having players describe the agent in human terms was a testament to how well it worked." And again, interesting choice of words here from Dr. Wurman. This is something I would like to follow up with him more in the future, because I was under the impression, just from my previous interviews with the Sony AI team and Yamauchi-san, that the slower agents were basically not trained as much.
Right.
And that's where you sort of get this humanistic, I guess is the word. It's like, a slower driver is one that hasn't trained as much in real life. And that's basically how these AI agents work. They just had not seen as much track time, and so they were slower. So I was under the impression that to make a slower agent, you just introduce one that's not as well trained, and then you have a slower agent. So I was kind of surprised that he said that this is a challenge. But if you notice, he says at the very end of that quote, He says slower in a real human way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key word there, that that it's like, how do you get an AI agent which is more experienced but also not as fast? So, and that's really true. Like, I could have the same amount of track time as Igor Fraga, but Igor's more talented than I am. And so he's always going to be faster, by and large, he's going to be faster. And so he's going to make, fewer mistakes than I am, and that sort of thing. And that is a real challenge. And it will be very interesting to learn more about how the Sony AI team addresses that, because I think that's a really good question. And I hope that they share more and continue to share more about how this development works and how they solve that problem.
Yeah,
because that is a really good question. And then for the second point, I knew that people would be attributing things to this Sophie especially when I did the early demo, and I saw the emojis pop up. I thought, oh boy, people are going to have thoughts about this. Like, there's going to be comments, especially when it like, bumps into, and it's like, gotcha. I'm
that's
like,
the exact face as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, this is going to be spicy. And and they really did, because they said, oh, I noticed it does this and it does that, and it does kind of have certain attributes which sort of could lead into this big theoretical philosophical discussion about certain things that are just intrinsic to good driving, or aggressive driving. Fast driving is by default aggressive, and here's an agent that's purely trained on what is fast. It doesn't care about anything else. It doesn't have anger, it doesn't have emotions, it doesn't have an ego. It just knows that it's supposed to drive quickly. And yet we see a lot of these traits which are sort of common in drivers, which might be more aggressive at times, or may have a bad reputation. And guess what? That's what the AI agent found was the fastest way to drive. So there's a bigger discussion to have over there. That's probably a separate video. but it's actually a good thing that, in my opinion, that people were attributing these emotions to it, and it's a good thing it had the emojis and that sort of thing, because it makes you forget that you're racing against a robot. And
100%.
When I was driving and defending your position, you feel like you're not just racing for your own pride, but you're racing for humanity. It's like it's like you've got to represent for the for us humans against the AI. So I think that's a good thing, and that will make people more. It makes the agent more endearing, and it makes it more entertaining at the end of the day.
And that's a key point, making it endearing as well, because as sort of customers of it, essentially, or the people that go up against it, we have to want to race it. You don't want to go into it thinking, oh, it's this thing again. You want to enjoy the race with it, because that's why it's there, to give you that good battle. The real human way is the point that I picked up on as well out of that, because I'm sure we've all raced against AI in certain simulators and games before, where you can just stick with them around the corners. They'll have insane grip around a corner, but then all of a sudden it'll be like they've got 50 horsepower less in a straight line, because that's the easy way to do it. They're on 95% throttle down the straights. And even sometimes in GT7 I've witnessed that, tune your car up enough, you can go past them in a straight line. Adding it into the campaign mode, which is a point from a previous question, is 100% has to be a given for me. But in that real human way, there has to be an interlink between the two, I think. And I mean, we've like I say, we've all raced against AI before that just that don't have that real human aspect in dialing the speed back, do they?
They don't.
It's going to be interesting to see how it copes with endurance races and weather changes as well. How will Sophie deal with a wet track? Because I'm not aware of any particular Sophie training with wet circuits and fuel loads and tire wear, and that's a whole bunch of challenges that they're going to have to overcome before they get it into the game for the entire campaign.
Very true.
Yeah, but I mean, it's natural to see players anthropomorphizing Sophie. I mean, the name alone, it sounds like a human being. But it's natural for humans to see patterns in things where there aren't necessarily any patterns to see.
Very true.
But Sophie just follows in the fine traditions of B-Spec Bob.
B-Spec Bob. That's something I've not heard for a while. Flipping heck. That is something that's almost seems like a blast from the past now, but that makes me feel really old. We're going to go on to the next question, which was, have you made any changes to the direction of Sophie's research since this first public test as a result of the public's reactions or experiences? That's an interesting one for sort of the development of it.
Yeah. So on this one, Dr. Wurman said, quote, "We've been looking at some of the anomalous behaviors that were reported to see if we can improve the training. We've also been working with PDI to make a version of the agent that can drive many more cars and be used in more flexible gameplay scenarios to give players more control over the races." So some things I feel were sort of coded in there. I think this indicates that the next time we see Sophie, it will have that much deeper integration into the game. It's also a really good sign that they seem to be integrating or seem to be training a more general purpose agent, which can drive more cars. Because that's the way it generally works is, they train a car and they train on a car and a track, and that's what the agent expects. It expects the car to behave in a certain way. It expects the track to go in a certain direction. And so that's a really tough challenge, because how do you train the agent on every car on every track in the game? That suddenly becomes a very expensive and computationally challenging.
And with every tune and every part and every tire and
exactly
all the range of the settings, and
that's when it adds into becoming a non-human behavior then as well, because it's just adding up numbers rather than figuring out what's going on live on the circuit. It's just adding numbers together, and that's when the behavior doesn't quite look as realistic and it can't adapt as much.
Right. And and that's that. We have the primitive AI in the game now, and and it can kind of adapt to a lot of these situations. I think, again, I don't really know exactly how it works, and nobody will tell me. But because Sophie is trained in such a different way, it's not something that they could just say, okay, here, drive this car, drive that car, go to this track, whatever. There's still some constraints. So his comments here indicate to me that they are branching out and solving this problem, which is a key one to solve in order to bring this to the rest of the game. So I think it suggests that we could be getting a step closer to fully replacing the AI. And then he also mentioned the flexible gameplay scenarios, which gives players more control over the races. So interesting choice of words there, once again, which probably will be well received. But this, gets into the debate of how much the game's career mode should be better defined by Polyphony Digital versus players doing things on their own in the event creator. And there's a very valid debate that is ongoing in the GTPlanet forums about, you could create whatever races you want, but that really should be Polyphony's job. They should be creating these races and that sort of thing. So, it's a game design decision from that point. But if they have this tool, like I said earlier, it sort of opens up a new realm of possibilities, and that's going to be something different.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's down to versatility, isn't it? Having the capability for it to drive whatever car on whatever track. And admittedly, we've all played many of the Gran Turismo games, if not all, since the very first day. And you've not always been able to make your own events in all of them. You can't just go and race what you want, where you want. And I think to remain competitive in the market, obviously Polyphony Digital have seen, look, we've got all these cars, we've got all these tracks. Why not just let people put whatever they want, wherever they want? That's we all want to do daft things like race Formula One cars on like the Tsukuba 1000 layout. Just do daft stuff like that. But at the same time, you need an AI that can cope with that. So I think that the thing I'm taking from that point is I'm intrigued to see how quickly they can streamline the process of training it to keep it up to date with new content and obviously more combinations and setups and whatever.
Yeah, I mean that's again the difference between an AI trained agent and a human is that you stick a human in a car, and they'll, I mean, to within a certain degree of accuracy, they'll be able to drive whatever the car is at whatever the track is.
I
They'll
won't.
know, yeah, but they'll know. You know, if you're driving something a lot faster, you have to brake a bit earlier, or a lot earlier if you're in the Veyron. There's understeer, oversteer. Each corner has different amounts of grip. Each line, you've got to take account of the marbles, wet track, drying track. A human can naturally adapt to all of these situations, but as Jordan was saying, an AI agent that has been specifically trained on our car on our track expects the car to behave in this particular way on the track, and it knows the fastest way around it. Once you nudge it out of its comfort zone, it might struggle to adapt, and that's part of what Sophie is hopefully addressing. And yeah, I mean the you were saying that there's 400 odd cars in Gran Turismo 7. There's dozens of circuits, and players can put together whatever crazy combinations they want to have whatever gameplay experience they want. But yes, there should be more specific, more curated events provided for players as well. And, hopefully this is going to kind of open the gates to that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure we all hope for the same on that. And like I say, it's down to, I mean, they're still learning about it as well while they're developing this. There's so many different working parts to it that all come together to create this fantastic AI. But there's so many more branches and ways for it to still reach out in different directions. It's the potential of it. You have to realize it, but still keep it controlled in a way so that whatever situation you end up in or wherever it goes, how it got there and how to then move it on from that. I'm probably just, it seems to everyone like I'm wobbling at this point, but in my head it makes sense. It's often that when it comes out of my mouth it doesn't. So I'll move on to the next question, shall I? Probably a good idea. The progress of AI research in general has rapidly accelerated over the past year. How have these changes impacted Sophie's development, and are you using any new techniques or technologies to further refine it? Basically just carrying on from what I just said.
Yeah. You're good. You're good.
You did know what you were talking about after all.
Yeah. It's a miracle.
So Dr. Wurman's response to this was, quote, "The Gran Turismo Sophie Race Together mode was one of the first times a system trained through reinforcement learning has been delivered into a production environment. This demonstrates that this technology can provide robust solutions to complex domains. The rapid advances in generative AI are certainly something we watch closely, but we haven't changed our approach. After all, you can ask ChatGPT how to drive a race car fast, and it will give you reasonable advice like hit the apex of the corners. But ChatGPT can't actually control the car, give you specific instructions for specific racing scenarios, or tell you whether a racing incident deserves a penalty." So I was kind of surprised that he brought ChatGPT into this discussion, but he's right. If you ask it these things, it can't do that, and it can't get in. I say get in a car, but it can't take control.
It's that real,
of a
Jordan.
Car. Yeah, it can't take control of a car and start driving it like Sophie can. I'm sure ChatGPT is something everybody watching this video has probably played around with, and it's incredible, but it obviously has its limitations. But there are a lot of advancements happening in AI. It's moving so fast, even just since we conducted this interview. Now, OpenAI, who runs ChatGPT, they've integrated these things called ChatGPT function calling, and what that allows ChatGPT to do is reach out to other services or other AIs or APIs and get information that it needs in order to solve the problem that you've given it. And there's a lot of research in getting AI to talk to other systems and possibly even other AIs in the future. And so this is moving so fast. I could foresee, in the future, a way for ChatGPT or something like ChatGPT to look at what Sophie might do in a situation, or look at the rules that Sophie has generated from its training, and be able to look at that, make sense of it, and say, yes, you could carry more speed through here, or you could put more steering lock in through this corner, or look at events that happen in a race and say, this situation, it could parse through the rules that Sophie looks at and says, oh, if you, being a human driver, if you had hit the brakes earlier, you could have avoided this accident. Therefore, you deserve a penalty, that sort of thing. And so there may be, and again, this is far out in the future. This is sort of a speculative question. This is all speculation, and I'm sure this may happen, may not happen, but there's a way that I can see in the future where we have these AI agents evaluating things that have happened on track, using Sophie's data and comparing it to that information to say, okay, this was good, this was bad. And that would be just an amazing tool, and would take the training to an even higher level, because we have these conversational bots now, like ChatGPT, that can just create very compelling sentences. I mean, it can generate voice. I mean, there's no telling where any of this could go, but I'm sure that that Polyphony and Kazunori Yamauchi and the Sony AI team, I'm glad they started this whole project when they did. I'm sure they're very happy about that, because everything is moving so quickly, and they could find themselves at the forefront of a lot of these technologies as they continue to develop. So it's really a good thing that they got started when they did.
Yeah, they're really spearheading the movement forward with it as well, and it's interesting. You mentioned the sort of the conversational bots that can go off and find the information themselves as well and come back to it. On a slight tangent, there was a couple of friends of mine when I believe they implemented it on Snapchat a while ago, that you could speak to it and have conversations, whatever, and ask it questions. And a few friends of mine wanted to sort of test how reliable that was, or how reputable the information was that it got. So one of them started to sort of drill it into its mind that there was a rumor that someone had said something, or he came up with a nickname for certain football fans or something. And a few days later, a friend of mine asked it a question about that, and it's not repeatable on air, honestly. But he asked it a couple of days down the line. Yeah, and then he basically found out that it had found this information and said it is believed to have been made by someone under this name, and this is what they call them for this reason. And he was thinking, it's only been, I think it was like 4 days they left between it, and it's, in a way, it's terrifying. Like, it scares the life out of me. But it'd be interesting to see how reputable the sources for said information are, and how Sophie becomes one of those reputable sources, because it's picked up the information from not just what it's learned, but what it's also sort of seen from other drivers and other players on the platform. I've sort of brought that full circle, I hope, but yeah, there's so many elements to it. That's what I find it so fascinating. I really do. It's amazing.
It would be interesting to see if there was a link between Sophie's driving and like a conversational bot, wherein the bot could advise you on car setup.
Yeah.
Or like as Jordan said, with a circuit guide, or virtually anything could like advise you on be a race engineer, and so there's this chance of rain coming, you should pit on this lap. There's all sorts of possibilities for, and again, this could come from looking at how Sophie does it, and taking that out and kind of giving you the information again, so that you can do it your way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important for Polyphony as well. Like I said, that with them spearheading this, it'll be important to sort of re-inject. I mean, I'm not saying they're not proud of Sophie, because obviously, why wouldn't they be? But it sort of recirculates that pride in that it could become this reputable source, to then put more into it again and again and keep improving it time and time. Because at the end of the day, they're the first ones to do it and do it this well. So it just all looks positive in that light, doesn't it?
Mm. And I would actually be interested to see how Sophie would cope with the real car. So that there was a project which I think was shown publicly at Goodwood a couple of years ago called Robo Race.
Yes,
and it would be really, really interesting to see how Sophie would compare with the Robo Race agent.
Yeah, to see how you could sort of plug that API into that sort of vehicle and just see how it even picks up, right, I need to tell it to do this, and this, to do that. And yeah, that would be I like the idea of that. I think we might have to get onto someone about that one. The final question was an interesting one for many reasons, Jordan. The first public test for Sophie was only available on PlayStation 5 consoles. Yippee. Can PlayStation 4 users have any expectations to see Sophie in the future? Now, I like this answer.
Yeah. It was short and sweet and to the point. So Dr. Wurman says, we do not have anything to share at this time.
Love it.
And I think it's probably safe to say that means no.
Yeah.
So, he talked about the engineering tasks, which is probably a very diplomatic way of saying it was really hard to get Sophie to run locally on a PlayStation 5. And
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, the PlayStation 4 probably just doesn't have enough horsepower to make it happen. So it's interesting from a Gran Turismo observer standpoint. It's sort of interesting to see the two versions of the game have some slight diversions in their content. I know this was something a lot of people were concerned about when it was first announced that it would be on both platforms. And, so I can understand why PS4 players may be not too happy about that.
Yeah.
But it looks like Sophie may be a PS5 feature for now. Yeah. But you never know. Could be wrong. They may pull something out of their hat that make game run in 720p on PS4 Pro or something, and then they find a few CPU cycles to give to Sophie or something. You just never know. But there may be some compromises that they have to make. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially if Sophie gets more deeply integrated into the game. Yeah. And I just now thought of this, but it may actually support the fact that we may not see a full Sophie integration until the next Gran Turismo game. It may be something that has to be a PS5 hardware exclusive before we see them going all in on Sophie.
And we are really reaching that point on both of the major console platforms now, where the older hardware is being left behind. I mean, we've seen it on other racing games where there's the two-tier system. Assetto Corsa Competizione, more or less the PS4 version is dead and buried. The PS5 version is still getting the same content as the PC version, albeit a little bit later. Microsoft is obviously, with the latest Forza Motorsport, has it's Xbox Series only, no Xbox One here. So yeah, it's really not a surprise that the 2013 consoles are kind of being nudged out the door.
Yeah, it's a shame to see, though, in a way as well, because a lot of people that know me know that I love my gaming PCs. That's what I've been sim racing on for years now, and you lot have managed to convert me to PS5s and have fallen in love with the thing. But it's the fact that you could get a graphics card for a PC, or even just updated hardware for a console, even, and the window for how long it stays not useful, but before it becomes obsolete, before you start to see issues with compatibility or what software it can run, or whether the manufacturer even supports it anymore if anything goes wrong, the windows are getting smaller and smaller as the speed increases with how quickly all the technology is advancing. We'll get a new set of graphics cards from Nvidia, for example, and they'll bring them out and everyone will be like, wow, these are amazing, let's wait for the prices to go down. And then a year later, when the prices have gone down to just about 4 digits, another one will come out that costs 40 grand. And because of that, the previous series that people are still holding on to have fallen by the wayside. And hopefully, people will understand the limitations hardware-wise, I'm sure, because those that are passionate about gaming enough, that know the consoles, they know what it takes to run these things. We all know how powerful these PS5s are. They're incredible. They'll understand the fact that Sophie can't be run on all of that. It will still be frustrating, of course, because you'll have to think to yourself, I need to get a PS5 now to be able to run this. I think that becomes natural progression if you follow the series and follow the games enough. It just depends on, obviously, everybody's circumstances, because we're not all in the same situation, unfortunately. But that's just part of the game, I'm afraid, isn't it, sometimes, with how these things progress so quickly.
But, it was bold of Polyphony to try to have GT7 on both consoles, and it may have been something born from necessity because of the silicon shortage and other global events. which, thankfully everything now seems to be more or less out of the other side, and PS5 is now rocketing through, setting sales records, and hopefully there'll be enough to go around for everyone. And
Well, it's been very interesting to go over these points, and thank you, of course, Jordan, to obviously getting the interview sorted and speaking to Dr. Wurman, who I wrongly called Dr. Verman before, so I do apologise for that. But it's been great to at least have a chat about this and see what the future is looking like for Sophie. Hopefully we've informed a lot of people on some points that they've all been wondering about as well and asking these questions. Do either of you have any final words before we sign off, or are we all good?
Andrew?
I'm just I'm excited to see what's going to happen with Sophie next. I had a great deal of fun with the 4-car battles, particularly the 1v1s were I think they were a good showcase of how fast Sophie can be, but they weren't necessarily as fulfilling for me because it wasn't quite enough vehicles. But I mean, hopefully we can see Sophie again in another play together event in GT7 sometime soon, and hopefully with a few more cars and a little bit more versatility in the offering.
Yeah, I miss Sophie. I was I was
the one that got away.
I know. Come back, Sophie. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and I think that if I'm really glad to see that the Sony AI team, reached out to me to help arrange this interview, and they're clearly still working on it. All that I think is a very positive development, and I hope that Kazunori and Polyphony realize just what an important piece of technology this is. Because if they can get this right, if they can dial this in and really make something great here, the racing game genre could be completely transformed. And just imagine a Gran Turismo game, a classic full Gran Turismo game with AI that is as fun to race against as Sophie is. That is, that's fun and competitive, challenging. It's really exciting to think about, and it could sort of change the narrative around racing games over the past 10, 15 years, where it's been all about online racing. And hey, online racing has problems. It's really fun, but there's a lot that has to happen in order to make it work. And it's all about internet connection quality, the quality of opponents. It's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah.
And I think something like Sophie could really just kind of come out of left field here and just take things back into a different direction, a very fun direction. And that's not to say online racing would go away. I don't want it to. I love online racing. It's really fun. But for training and for just pure fun, this is a big deal. And so I feel like they've got a great chance to push this forward and push other game developers forward as well. Like we already have Forza working on this, and I'm sure that the other game developers are going to be working on this as well. And hey, competition breeds excellence, and that's what it's all about. And us players, we're the ones who get to benefit from all this competition. So it's a very exciting time, and I'm very encouraged by everything that I heard in this interview.
Yeah, Dr. Wurman's really answered us very, very well, I'd say. He's done a wonderful, wonderful job. And I totally agree that, again, coming back to the point earlier about catching up to the competition instead of dialing it back, it's a similar situation with the developers as well. They can see what's being accomplished. They think, right, we need to go and do that as well now. We need to catch up and carry on, rather than saying, could you just slow the progress on that a little bit and help us out, make us look better. That's not quite how it is. But still, it's good to see that applies in the industry in that way as well. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. It's been absolutely wonderful. Jordan's new music video, Comeback Sophie, comes out in 3 weeks' time, so you can look out for that one. And thank you once again to Thrustmaster for sponsoring today's video. We are very grateful for your support here at GTPlanet. But from me, Chaz Draycott, Jordan Greer, and Andrew Evans, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you again very, very soon.